I remember the clatter first, my fork slipping from my fingers and tapping the edge of the plate as it fell. The sound was small, barely a whisper against the steady hum of the kitchen fan, but it echoed through me like a bruise. My arm, bound in stiff plaster from wrist to elbow, throbbed with every attempt to lift it. Even the steam rising from the food felt like an insult, close enough to smell, impossible to reach. Across the table, my daughter didn't move. She just watched. Her husband leaned back in his chair, arms folded, lips pushed into something that almost looked like amusement. I tried again slowly, foolishly to grip the fork with my good hand, but the broken arm tugged at my balance. The plate shifted. My elbow knocked the glass. A few drops of water slid across the table and pooled by my wrist. Still, neither of them reached out. I cleared my throat. It's difficult. I'll manage. My daughter finally spoke, her voice soft but shaped like a blade. No, Mom, you won't, and you shouldn't. I looked up at her, searching her face for warmth, but all I found was distance, a kind of practiced coldness she must have learned from someone else. Her husband smirked. Go on, he told her. Say it. She didn't hesitate. He taught you a lesson, she said quietly. Now you understand. Understand what? That pain silences people? That dignity is something you must hold with both hands or lose entirely. I sat there, the smell of rice and curry filling the room, my stomach twisting, my pride slowly draining from me like warmth from an open window. A broken arm is a simple thing, bones crack, bones heal. But humiliation? That settles deeper. It spreads, and as I sat at my own dinner table, starving in more ways than one, I realized something sharp and undeniable. When cruelty becomes casual, the balance of power shifts. And someone eventually pays for it. The table grew quieter with every passing second to quiet, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound like an unwanted guest. 3 of my daughter's friends sat with us, eyes fixed on their plates, pretending the scene unfolding wasn't happening. Their spoons moved mechanically, scraping porcelain, stirring untouched food. No one looked at me. No one asked if I needed help. Silence, I learned that night, can slice deeper than any insult. My daughter broke it first, her voice steady, practiced, almost bored. Mom, you have to accept consequences. You can't live your whole life thinking you're right. I blinked at her, the teacup beside me trembling from the vibrations of the table, though maybe it was my hand causing that. The steam curled upward in thin, fragile ribbons, disappearing before it reached the light. Her husband didn't speak. He just pushed his chair slightly back, stretching his legs, taking up more space as if to remind me who had rewritten the rules of the room. One of the guests coughed into her napkin. Another shifted in his seat. No one interrupted. My daughter continued, looking straight at her food rather than at me. You always interfere, always question, always judge. This time, he wanted you to feel something real, something real. As if pain needed validation, I swallowed hard, the motion sending a dull ache up the side of my neck. I didn't deserve this, I whispered, though even I wasn't sure whether I meant the broken bone or the humiliation. Her husband finally spoke, voice low. People only change when they're forced to. No one disagreed with him. The weight of neglect settled around me like dust, quiet, suffocating, impossible to brush away. The food's aroma thickened the air, taunting rather than comforting. I could feel my dignity slipping, sliding like the tea's reflection vibrating inside the cup. It struck me then, cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a choice to look away, and the looking away burns longer. He sat in my husband's chair. That was the first thing I noticed when the conversation faded and the room seemed to tilt slightly, as if memory itself had been disturbed. The high-backed wooden seat, polished by years of my husband's quiet strength, now held a different kind of weight. My son-in-law lounged in it, legs spread, one arm draped over the carved edge as though he had conquered something, or someone. A half-empty glass of whiskey rested near his elbow, the smell sharp and arrogant. He took a slow sip, letting the liquid roll in his mouth before swallowing. A thin sheen of sweat glistened along his hairline, not from heat, but from pride. He liked this. The power, the attention, the quiet fear he believed he commanded. Behind him, the wall clock ticked louder than usual. Tick, tock, a steady reminder of the man who once sat there, my husband, who never needed volume or violence to lead a room. My son-in-law glanced at me, lips curling into a lazy smile. "You know, this chair fits me," he said, tapping the armrest with 2 fingers. "Feels right." I didn't reply. My gaze lingered on the grooves in the wood, grooves my husband's hands had left during long nights of paperwork, or storytelling, or gentle arguments softened by his laughter. The chair had carried decades of him. Now it carried something hollow. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You never respected boundaries. Now you see what happens." It wasn't the words that cut me, it was seeing him take ownership of a space built by a man he could never equal. His arrogance sweated off him like heat waves. Mixing with the bitter scent of whiskey and the faint odor of stale ambition, the others at the table kept eating, forks clinking nervously, eyes drifting anywhere but toward the throne he had stolen. Some men win crowns. Some take them from the dead and pretend it makes them kings. The table felt crowded, yet every person seated there seemed impossibly far away, as if cruelty created distance no amount of furniture could bridge. His 3 colleagues sat stiffly, their dinner plates half finished, their eyes flicking between my broken arm and his smug posture in my husband's chair. No one dared speak first. No one wanted to be the one who acknowledged what was happening. The youngest among them, a man with kind eyes and trembling hands, finally cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you need my son-in-law?" Raised a single finger. Not a word, just a finger. The room froze. The young man swallowed, shrinking back into his seat as though the gesture alone had struck him. He stared down at his rice, pushing it into a small, pointless mountain. Shame settled across his shoulders like a weighted blanket. Another colleague shifted in his chair, opening his mouth as if to object, but one look from my son-in-law silenced him. The look wasn't loud or dramatic, it was the kind of look men use when they're used to being obeyed without question. My daughter watched all of this with a faint, brittle expression, as if she were observing a storm she had already decided to let destroy whatever it wanted. Someone at the end of the table pretended to reach for water, though the glass was already full. Another wiped a non-existent stain from her sleeve. They fidgeted. They avoided. They hid behind half-chewed food and shallow breaths. No one said, "This is wrong." No one stood up. No one even met my eyes. I felt my dignity slipping again, sliding inch by inch across the tablecloth and pooling somewhere near the untouched dishes. My broken arm pulsed with dull heat, but the deeper it came from watching grown adults shrink from decency, silence. That was their contribution, and in that moment, I understood the most dangerous truth of all. The abuser is rarely alone. There is always a table full of witnesses, people who choose comfort over courage. I don't know what pushed the words out of me, pain, memory, or something older than both, but my voice came out steadier than my hands. "You have 1 minute left in that chair." The sentence slid across the table like a cold draft. Even the clock seemed to hesitate before ticking again. His colleagues froze, spoons suspended in midair. My daughter's head jerked up, shock widening her eyes. The room's warmth thinned, replaced by something sharper, metallic, like the air before a storm breaks. My son-in-law didn't move at first. Then he leaned back, lips stretching into a slow, deliberate grin. 1 minute, he echoed. "And what happens after that? You going to scold me again?" His laughter came next, loud, confident, shaped to mock. But it didn't reach his eyes. Those remained dark, watchful, calculating. Under the table, his foot tapped once, betraying the first crack in his composure. I rested my good hand near the teacup, tracing a circle in the condensation gathering beneath it. "You heard me," I said quietly. 1 minute. The young colleague who had tried to help earlier swallowed hard, his gaze darting between us like he expected something to break bone, voice, or pride. My daughter whispered, "Mom, stop," but there was no conviction in her plea, only fear of where this might go. My son-in-law scoffed, but the laugh was thinner now. "You can't even lift a fork," he said, flicking his fingers dismissively. "What exactly are you going to do?" The clock answered for me. Tick tock. His smirk flickered. Authority doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in a whisper, steady as tidewater, patient as grief. And in that charged minute before he realized what he had provoked, the room shifted. The witnesses leaned back. My daughter's breath hitched. The air tightened around him, around the chair he didn't deserve. 1 minute, I repeated, not a threat, not a plea, Just inevitability spoken aloud. The clock began its slow, merciless work the moment I repeated the words. Tick, tock. Each sound landed like a pebble dropped into still water, small but impossible to ignore. The rhythm filled the dining room, slipping into the spaces between breaths, stitching tension into the air. My son-in-law lifted his glass again, but this time his hand didn't look as steady. Whiskey sloshed against the rim. He forced a laugh, louder than needed, trying to drown out the clock. "Oh, come on," he said, shaking his head. "You think anyone here cares about your little countdown?" But his voice, not the words, just the sound, betrayed him. A hairline tremor, a tiny fracture in the arrogance he wore like armor. My daughter's discomfort spread across her face like a slow blush of shame. She shifted in her seat, fingers twisting the napkin into a rope. Maybe we should just move to the living room," she murmured, not looking at either of us. He snapped. "Sit still. We're not going anywhere." The harshness in his tone startled even him. I could see it flicker in his eyes. The clock responded. Tick, tock. 40 seconds gone. I straightened slightly, ignoring the throb in my broken arm. Pain had become background noise. Resolve had taken center stage. It settled inside me like cold iron, quiet, heavy, unshakable. "You're wasting your minute," I said softly. He scoffed again, but the sound cracked. "You're bluffing." A broken grandmother with threats, how original. "Mother," my daughter whispered. "Please don't," but I wasn't listening to either of them. I was listening to the clock, to my own breath, to the certainty rising in me like tidewater, slow, unstoppable, indifferent to whatever stood in its way. Tick, tock. 20 seconds left. My son-in-law leaned forward, veins tightening along his jaw. "You think I'm scared of you?" he asked, but even he heard the desperation underneath. I didn't answer, because fear had already entered the room, not mine, but his. My daughter rose halfway from her chair, as if pulled by two opposing currents, the instinct to protect me and the habit of protecting him. Her hands hovered in the air before she slowly placed them on her husband's shoulder. The gesture wasn't affectionate. It was surrender. "Mom," she said quietly, "please, just cooperate." The word tasted strange in the room. Cooperate. As if I were the problem. As if pain earned, humiliation served, and a stolen chair were all legitimate if only I would behave. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw the woman I raised. Soft-hearted, quick to help, easily wounded. But now her gaze looked drained, tired in a way that comes not from sleepless nights but from living beside a man who bends everything: truth, loyalty, identity until it matches his will. Cooperate how? I asked. My voice didn't shake. By pretending this is normal? She flinched. She looked down. He just wants respect. Respect. Another word twisted into something unrecognizable. Her husband smirked without looking at her, tapping the armrest of the chair he had no right to sit in. "See? Even your own daughter understands," he said, as if she had chosen the correct answer on a test he administered. But her expression told a different story, one of exhaustion and quiet fear. She wasn't standing with him. She was standing behind him, like a shadow that had forgotten it once had its own shape. "Mom, please. Don't make this worse," she whispered, voice cracking the smallest bit. "Just let him be. Don't provoke him." The words landed harder than any insult he had thrown at me that night. My daughter, my child, was asking me to bend to a bully, to protect her marriage, to protect herself, to sacrifice me. The clock kept ticking. Tick, tock. But my heart stopped for a moment, caught in the realization that bruises fade, bones mend, and pride can be rebuilt, but betrayal from your own blood cuts a path no healing ever fully reaches. Some rooms are locked by walls. Others are locked by choices. And that night, my daughter locked herself on the wrong side. The smells should have comforted me: ginger, warm ghee, soft rice, the kind of food that once meant family, but that night, each scent carried the sting of something lost. The china plate in front of me remained untouched, its delicate blue patterns glowing under the harsh ceiling light. I had chosen that set with my husband years ago, turning each plate in my hands to check for chips. Now it looked foreign, distant, like something from another family's table. Steam curled upward from the serving bowls, thin ribbons of heat disappearing before they touched me. I tried lifting my good hand again, but the cast on my broken arm dragged my shoulder forward, pulling painfully across the collarbone. A slow, pulsing ache traveled through me bone deep, but not as deep as the humiliation. I studied it all carefully, the gleam of untouched food, the way the spoon trembled slightly when I reached for it, the weight of silence pressing against my ribs. Pain sharpened everything. It turned the room into a photograph where every detail mattered. Even the chandelier's light felt colder, as if it had chosen sides too. My son-in-law laughed at something one of his colleagues said, a quick, barking laugh that bounced off the walls and left a sour aftertaste. My daughter sat stiffly beside him, once again smoothing her hair behind her ear the way she did whenever she felt trapped. This house, once warm, once noisy with my husband's footsteps, once filled with the smell of tea and late-night conversations, now felt like someone else's territory, a place where I was a guest overstaying my welcome. A woman with a broken arm shouldn't have clarity. She should have confusion, fear, dizziness. But suffering can sweep away the fog faster than joy ever could. My resolve hardened in that moment, not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean line forming inside me. If they wouldn't let me belong in my own home, then they wouldn't stay comfortable in it either. Pain had taken away my strength, yes. But pain had also given me something sharper. Focus. The doorbell sliced through the tension like a blade, sharp, metallic, too loud for a quiet night. Conversations halted mid-breath. Even the clock seemed to pause before continuing its steady pulse. My son-in-law straightened in the stolen chair, chest lifting with a confidence he didn't deserve. The grin returned to his face, wide, triumphant. The kind of smile men wear when they believe the world has finally aligned with their ambition. That'll be them, he said, tapping the armrest with smug certainty. Perfect timing, them. As if he were expecting applause. As if someone out there belonged more to this home than I did. His colleagues exchanged relieved looks, shoulders lowering, spines softening. The young one even sighed a quiet breath of escape, believing the worst moment of the night had passed. My daughter stood quickly, smoothing her clothes, eager for any interruption that might reset the temperature of the room. Everyone relaxed. Except me. The sound of that bell didn't soothe me. It struck something deeper, something instinctive. I felt it in the same place where grief had lived for years. The same place where survival had tucked itself away and waited for moments like this. My son-in-law lifted his glass to finish the last of his whiskey, flashing me a look meant to gloat. You see, he said, respect arrives when you stop resisting. But he misread the entire room. He always did. Arrogance narrows a man's vision until he sees only what flatters him. He didn't notice how the air shifted, how the shadows from the doorway stretched differently. How my daughter hesitated before reaching the handle, sensing something she couldn't name. I watched her fingers stop just shy of the lock. My breath held itself still. The bell rang again, shorter this time, but harder. A knock followed. Not rude, not polite, just certain. My son-in-law grinned wider. Let them in, he commanded. But I knew deep in the quiet place pain had cleared for me that whatever waited on the other side of that door was not the victory he expected. Arrogance blinds men. Truth does not. The footsteps reached us before the visitor did, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not the polite shuffle of a family friend arriving with documents. Not the eager trot of a notary ready to earn an easy fee. These steps belonged to someone who didn't need to impress or introduce themselves. Someone used to being feared long before being recognized. The hallway swallowed the sound, then released it back in steady echoes. Thud, thud, thud. Each one pulled the air tighter. My daughter's hand trembled around her wine glass. The rim clicked against a porcelain saucer, a tiny sound. But in that frozen room it rang out like a warning bell. Across the table, the guests straightened in their seats, spines rigid, jaws locked. They didn't dare turn their heads, but I could see their eyes flick toward the doorway, wide with a quiet alarm they didn't have the courage to name. My son-in-law's confidence wavered for the briefest moment, a flicker, a fracture. His smile stayed on his mouth but not in his eyes. He glanced toward the corridor, as if the shape approaching should already be familiar. It wasn't, probably stuck in the hallway, he muttered, trying to laugh, trying to pull the reins back on the moment. Old building. Sound plays tricks. But the sound didn't lie. Footsteps like that belong to purpose, not paperwork. The shadows along the wall shifted, first broad shoulders cutting through slants of lamplight. A silhouette grew slowly into view, tall enough to swallow a doorway. steady enough to erase doubt. The guests inhaled sharply, then held their breath. My daughter stepped back without realizing it, her fingers leaving the handle as if it had suddenly burned her. She looked toward her husband for reassurance. What she got instead was his first true flicker of fear. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the clock seemed unsure whether it should continue. And in that stillness, I felt something old and familiar ripple through me, not hope, not relief, but recognition. Justice doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, letting the guilty expose their own terror. A murmur drifted in from the corridor, low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't rise to be heard but expected the world to lean in. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't familiar. It carried authority the same way a blade carries an edge. My son-in-law stiffened. His fork paused mid-air, hands suspended, as if the sound had pierced straight through the alcohol haze he'd wrapped himself in all evening. He forced a chuckle, but it cracked halfway out, thin as old glass. Probably the attorney, he announced, though his eyes had already lost their certainty. I told him to come right to the dining room, but even he seemed unconvinced by his own voice. The murmured words in the hallway grew clearer, short commands, soft but resolute. Footsteps shifted, 2 sets this time, deliberate and synchronized. Not the fussy shuffle of a bureaucrat. Not the hesitant steps of someone invited into a hostile home. My daughter swallowed hard, her hand drifting toward her husband's sleeve, seeking an anchor. He jerked slightly, not from her touch but from the fear he didn't want to show. Sit, he whispered to her, too quickly, too sharply. His authority was slipping, and he felt it. Around the table, the guests tried to become invisible. One straightened his tie with shaking fingers. Another gripped her napkin until the fabric twisted. They knew something was wrong. You could feel it in the air, the way the walls seemed to lean inward, listening. Then a voice from the hallway clipped the silence. Wait here. 2 words, calm, commanding, unmistakably in charge. My son-in-law flinched. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping the floor with a harsh note that made everyone jump. He lifted his chin, smoothing his jacket as if dignity could be ironed flat with a single gesture. I'll handle this, he muttered, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. He stepped toward the doorway with a false swagger, shoulders tight, breath shallow. He didn't know who or what waited for him, but the room did. The walls, the guests, my daughter, and me. We all felt it. The kind of danger only a guilty man recognizes first. The footsteps stopped just beyond the doorway, and for a moment the silence inside the dining room tightened like a pulled thread. My son-in-law stood half-turned toward the hall, shoulders squared but tense, as if bracing for impact. He tried to summon that smug confidence he wore like a cheap cologne, but even from where I sat, I could see it slipping from his posture like water through open fingers. Then a voice spoke a single phrase, low and unmistakably authoritative. Not loud, not hurried, just absolute. The woman closest to the wall gasped softly, covering her mouth as though she'd broken some unspoken rule. The 2 men beside her exchanged quick, panicked glances, their forks forgotten, their plates untouched. Recognition moved through them like a cold draft. My daughter stiffened, the color draining from her face. Her eyes flicked to her husband, desperate for an explanation he didn't have. The wine glass in front of her rattled against the table, trembling from the tiny shake she couldn't hide. My son-in-law stepped backward into the room, trying to mask the retreat as a polite gesture. His voice came out thin and strangled. Governor Sterling, sir. I wasn't expecting. There it was. The name. A name that carried weight far heavier than the walls around us. A name that held signatures capable of making or unmaking careers, budgets, investigations, lives. The guests inhaled sharply, instinctively sitting straighter, as though the governor's shadow alone demanded posture. One of them whispered, "Governor here," as if saying it out loud made it more dangerous. Power had entered my home without knocking. It didn't ask. It didn't explain. It simply arrived, filling every corner of the dining room with its quiet, unforgiving presence. My son-in-law tried to recover, stumbling through a clumsy half-bow, half-smile. We were just having a family dinner. Please come in. But his eyes betrayed him. They were wide, wet. Darting searching the room for an exit he suddenly realized he didn't have. And I sat perfectly still, watching the truth dawn on him with slow, chilling clarity. He hadn't invited power. Power had come for him. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, changed in the room the moment Governor Sterling's name settled into the air. It wasn't loud, not dramatic like thunder or shattering glass. It was quieter, like the way a storm pauses just before the first lightning strike. My son-in-law took another step backward, and this time he didn't bother to disguise it as politeness. His heel grazed the leg of my husband's old chair, and he jolted as if the wood itself had accused him. His mouth opened, but only broken sounds came out, frayed threads of excuses that unraveled before they ever formed. He looked unsure for the first time all evening. Unsure and small. Across the table, my daughter's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate. The sound was sharp, almost indecent in the tense quiet. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she stared at her husband as though seeing him through a different lens, one not fogged by habit, fear, or loyalty to the wrong person. Her lower lip quivered, and for a flicker of a moment, regret crossed her face. Not regret for him, for herself. And me. I inhaled just one breath, but it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in months. I lifted my chin slowly, deliberately. The weight of the cast tugged at my shoulder, but the weight inside my chest felt lighter than it had since the day I lost my husband. My spine straightened, and the room seemed to shift with me, as if the floorboards themselves remembered who had walked them longest. A strange stillness came over me, the kind that settles on a person when fear finally burns itself out. I wasn't loud. I didn't move suddenly. Yet, somehow, every eye in that room turned toward me as though they felt something rise, something old, something rightful. My son-in-law swallowed hard, as if only now realizing I hadn't been defeated, merely waiting for the truth to arrive, for masks to crack, for this moment. Because dignity, my dignity, had been bruised, battered, nearly buried, but not destroyed. And in that quiet, breathless shift in the air, I reclaimed it piece by piece. The room felt smaller now, air pressed in tight, as if the walls knew what was coming and wanted to witness it up close. Governor Sterling stepped forward, his presence cutting through the space with a quiet authority that made everyone straighten instinctively. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Some men carry power the way others carry breath. My son-in-law tried to greet him, but the words snagged in his throat. "Gee, Governor, I didn't expect." Sterling raised a hand, not a dramatic gesture, just enough to silence him. And it worked. The dining room fell into a stillness so sharp it hummed. Beside him stood two aides, both watching the scene with the calm awareness of people who had already been briefed. My daughter's eyes darted between them, confusion mixing with dawning fear. "Mrs. Rao," Sterling said, turning to me with a respectful nod. "I received your message." My son-in-law whipped around, stunned. "Message?" His voice cracked like thin glass. "What message? I wasn't told." "You weren't meant to be," I replied, my voice steady, measured. "Some matters require discretion." He blinked at me as if I'd spoken a language he'd never heard before. He waited, hoping, perhaps, that I would rescue him from a truth he'd built his life avoiding. But I had nothing left to protect him with. Not after tonight. Sterling opened a slim folder on the table. Paper rustled, soft but deadly. "We have reports," he said calmly, "of financial misconduct at the clinic you manage, misuse of funds, documented intimidation of staff, withholding wages," and he paused, "coercion inside this home." The final word struck harder than any slap. My son-in-law's knees wavered. "I can explain. These are misunderstandings, rumors. She's lying." "No," Sterling said gently. "You are." The last thread snapped. His face collapsed inward, all arrogance melting into something pitiful and wet, a bully unmasked. "Please," he whispered, voice trembling, "let's talk outside privately." "No," I said softly, and because the room needed no more noise, my refusal was enough. Justice didn't roar. It simply landed clean, cold, irreversible. By the time the door closed behind the governor and his aides, my son-in-law escorted out between them like a man suddenly aware of gravity. The house fell into an unfamiliar quiet, not the uneasy silence that had filled the dinner earlier. This one was softer, worn in, like the air after summer rain. The plates were still on the table, food untouched and cooling, steam now a ghost of what it had been. The guests slipped out quietly, heads bowed, grateful witnesses dismissed. Only my daughter remained, frozen beside her chair, staring at the empty space where her husband had stood moments ago. She looked smaller without him, younger, more like the girl who used to braid my hair and fall asleep on my shoulder during storms. "Mama," she whispered, voice cracking like a child's. I didn't know it had gone this far. I didn't answer right away. Pain tugged at my injured arm as I reached for the teacup before me. But I lifted it anyway, slow, deliberate. The lukewarm tea tasted metallic, almost bitter, yet it grounded me, reminded me that my hands, even broken, still belonged to me. "You chose him," I finally said. Not harshly, not to wound, just the truth laid bare between us. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I thought I had to keep the peace. "There is no peace," I replied, "built on someone else's suffering." She covered her face, shoulders trembling. For a moment, I simply watched her, not as a judge, but as a mother who had survived more than one kind of heartbreak. My anger had burned itself out in the confrontation. What remained was something quieter, steadier. I placed my good hand on the table, palm open. She reached for it instantly. "I forgive you," I said, "but things will change. I won't live under anyone's shadow anymore, not yours, not his." She nodded, gripping my fingers as though anchoring herself. Outside, the sea murmured beyond the window, dark, waves rolling in and out with patient certainty. It didn't rush. It didn't punish. It simply moved forward, carrying what it must, releasing what it could. I chose to do the same. Forgiveness for her, freedom for me.